28 years later marks the return of director Danny Boyle to the zombie franchise he started 23 years ago. It expands the world and establishes what the new normal looks like whilst delivering a heartfelt family drama and setting up the trilogy. But before I get further into it, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel and switching on notifications, as it really helps us out. 28 years later is curiously divided into 3 distinct main plots, involving our main character Spike. I will go deeper into each section, so be warned, spoilers are incoming. The first plot relates to Jimmy, sections of which we get at the start and at the end of this film. The second plot is Spike with his dad, and this takes place directly after the first Jimmy section and essentially finishes off Act 1 of the film. Finally, we get to the third section, the meat of this film, involving Spike's mum, in which we also get introduced to the Bone Temple and the Doctor character, which we now know are the subjects of the second film. We're given 3 short films vaguely connected by the premise and a few overlapping points. This is an infuriating structure, and it echoes a trend that has seen increasingly disjointed storytelling ever since the pandemic, during which, in order for productions to keep going, they needed to segregate actors as far as possible so that there's less cast and crew to spread COVID. This led to films that had very few characters and TV series that were essentially anthologies of short films. 28 years later was filmed in 2024, so it is not the subject of these restrictions, but for some reason they chose to segregate these plots cleanly anyway. Yes, his mum features within the dad storyline, but only briefly to introduce the family dynamics before spending the rest of the time on the mainland, just Spike and his dad alone learning survival skills. The reason I find it so infuriating as a writer myself is that this is meant to be the starting point. Leaving it like this is lazy writing, and because so many of you have found my channel from my Tenet videos, I'll use Nolan's films as examples. The dream collapsing sequence in Inception has one of the most complex structures that I've come across, and it relies on the intercutting between layers of dreams, with clever connections between them in order for the final mission to be as gripping as it is. Interstellar is a minefield of time jumps, but it never leaves us in the same place for too long, with constant cliffhangers throughout as we are taken elsewhere to learn more information. Memento, his breakthrough film, was at some point a linear story, on some piece of paper, on a whiteboard, laid out chronologically, but then he played with the structure to make it dramatically compelling. I would argue that the least compelling film within his roster is also the simplest in terms of structure, Oppenheimer. But that also had times when we're jumping between pre- and post-invention of the bomb. Yet, those black and white Robert Downey Jr. moments, for me, interrupted the story, because of how they starkly contrasted the rest of the film in terms of style. But even they were not thrown in as an uninterrupted section. Choosing when to feed the audience information is one of the most difficult parts of writing long-form content. Short stories differ in that they may withhold information until the end, but they don't usually waste time getting there. They just don't have the time to spend inserting more backstory or wasting precious minutes not in service of the end goal. Having this mindset benefits feature films and TV series, except with the comfort of knowing you can juggle several subplots in service of that end. 28 years later doesn't do that, and its individual sections could definitely slot into Tales of the Walking Dead. It's particularly annoying considering how neat and self-standing the previous 2 films in the series are, both compelling, both very simple, and the second involving a family similar to the one in 28 years, except the family members feel far more connected to one another. Sure, you could argue that that's the point. It's a broken family in a broken world, but I'd only argue it if I was desperately trying to justify this structure. I think merging the dad and mum stories more intricately would have been way more compelling, so I'm not left feeling like I had wasted my time getting to know the dad for him then to disappear. Act 1 is there to set up characters. In this film, it sets them up and abandons them. It's a bizarre choice considering Alex Garland wrote this, and he has a fantastic track record of brilliant writing, especially within the sci-fi genre, and he's had far more interwoven structures before. I wonder therefore whose idea it was to have these divisions. Anyway, rant about structure aside, there is plenty of things to enjoy within each section. Jimmy's is the most random, showing a gang of Power Ranger-esque fighters that have seemingly lost their marbles in the apocalypse and are engaging in a life of violence and tomfoolery in order to escape the state of the world. They reminded me of characters from Mad Max and Borderlands, quite non-naturalistic and heightened. We get the origin story of their leader at the start, and then he's connected to our main character at the end of the film. But there is no payoff to the information we learn about this weird group. We're only left with a bunch of questions. It's an interesting choice to have a framing device that doesn't relate to the main plot, but maybe I'm just overthinking it and it's just there to be a hook to get us to watch the next one. I actually got into a heated debate about cliffhangers and trilogies in terms of maybe I'm judging this film a little too harshly, as many famous trilogies within film history, such as my all-time favourite, The Lord of the Rings, also have incomplete stories independent of each other. The journey is interrupted. Much the same could be said about Dune, where Paul Atreides' character arc doesn't significantly progress throughout the first film alone. It is a gorgeous sci-fi and I will be watching the third one, but as the title of my review suggests, the first film definitely leaves you wanting more. I remember the experience of enjoying a TV series one episode per week, and the anticipation contributing to this enjoyment. My only similar film experiences are Twilight and The Hunger Games, but I would argue that both of those franchises have complete story arcs within each film, apart from those that are divided into parts, and these contribute to the whole rather than relying on it, and this continues even with current additions to the Hunger Games franchise. With all of these examples, because they are based on books, the audience likely know that this is not the end of the story. They aren't expecting a payoff within that cinema experience. Whilst when I went in to see this film, I didn't know that it's part of a trilogy and felt a bit betrayed, and this definitely affected my enjoyment of it. Anyway, on to the second section, with Aaron Taylor-Johnson as the dad teaching Spike how to kill zombies and survive in rural, abandoned England. I loved this section. I think the relationship between father and son was well acted and super believable, and I liked exploring the post-apocalyptic world through them, learning what's changed from the previous two films. I thought this was an excellent way of giving exposition without it feeling forced. Good writing to counteract the bad structure. The third plot with Jodie Comer as the mother was a mixed bag. There were a lot of times where her illness would have easily gotten them killed, but there were conveniently no zombies around. This coincidental good luck just kept coming, and each time it made their survival a bit less convincing, even with the assistance of the soldier. Speaking of which, I really enjoyed the soldier's subplot, as we finally got to understand what else was happening in the world and how the UK was being isolated. The sequence in the petrol station was action-packed and super effective, as was the one in the train later on. But once again, I found the fact that the Alpha being so close to them made little sense considering how left alone they were later in the film. Jodie Comer is fantastic as usual, but I watched her last year in another apocalypse film, The End We Start From, where she also goes on a similar journey as a mother, and I think there was a lot more dimension to that character. Both were excellently performed, but I think she struggled here to be more than just the dying person. It was only in those moments where she loses her sense of time and starts talking about the past where the character felt more nuanced, but I felt she could have been given more to do, or at least more high and low points as her health declines. Whenever she and Spike are talking, her illness takes precedence over the apocalypse. There were many moving and saddening moments that made it feel like a straight drama, with a lot less brutality and gore compared to the rest of the film. This meant the section felt disconnected tonally from the other two plotlines. It was a good way to introduce the Doctor character and his bizarre bone temple, but at that point, the story felt more connected to the exaggerated angle of Jimmy's plotline. The Doctor's behavior is pretty far-fetched, even for an apocalypse, and be it terrifying and beautiful at the same time, he's another example of continuous good luck, and perhaps that's the point. How do you live on with survivor's guilt? Aside from the story and acting, a lot of people were excited about the cinematography of this film. Danny Boyle famously shot 28 Days Later on digital camcorders in standard definition, which has not aged well, unfortunately, but also sweetly marks the film as looking exactly as it should do for the time period it's set in. This time he's using multiple iPhones as his primary cameras, including setting up a makeshift bullet time to capture zombies being killed in a 180-degree free snapshot. He chose smartphones in order to minimize the size of the camera rig, allowing for easy movement for action sequences, lightweight rigging for drone shots, and even to reduce the need for a large camera team whose footprints would spoil the environment, as he explains in a great video on the Sony Pictures channel. I thought it was a very effective choice, and it's nice to see smartphones used not necessarily because they are the cheapest option, but because they make sense to the story. And having professionals behind the lens means the technology is being pushed in new and exciting ways. The film has a distinct visual style which is given added oomph with a vibrant color grade that I absolutely adore. The score is also quite exciting, composed by a Scottish hip-hop band called Young Fathers. It gives the film a unique voice, which continues the tradition of memorable soundtracks within Danny Boyle's films, a subject matter I would highly recommend going down the rabbit hole for. Kudos also and always to the editor for creating such a compelling film, be it that their job was made a little easier with those 3 distinct sections. Still, with small cameras allowing for quicker shooting, I imagine they had a lot to look through, and the high-octane sequences were perfectly paced to increase audience heart rates. I think often the value of the edit goes unnoticed precisely because it's there to go unnoticed. Overall, 28 years later would have benefited from better intermingling of its plotlines, and suffers from inconsistent tone, but otherwise is a brilliantly acted apocalypse film that creatively uses technology to immerse us in the action. Thank you for watching. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe and switch on notifications so you don't miss future videos, and comment below with your thoughts on the film. For more film content, feel free to follow us on Letterboxd and TikTok, links in the description. Otherwise, this has been Tea Break Film Reviews. My name's Michelle, and I hope you have a great day.